Welcome to the Workplace Minute, powered by H3HR Advisors and sponsored by WorkHuman. Thanks for joining me for a quick update on what's important in the world of work. My name is Steve Boese. Today in the Workplace Minute, we're going to take a look back. A year ago, a new administration took office in Washington. And regardless of where you sit politically, it's impossible to argue that the first year of the second Trump administration has not had a meaningful impact on workers, workplaces, and the broader climate that HR and business leaders are operating inside of every day. This episode is a companion piece to the recent show we did on the changing posture at the EEOC. This one's a little broader. This is a look at year one from a worker's perspective. What has changed, what has improved, and what has deteriorated? And how should HR and business leaders be thinking about year two? So let's start with the data. Over the past year, unemployment has remained relatively low by historical standards, hovering in the mid 4% range. Job creation has continued, but at a noticeably slower pace than in the prior 2 years. We've seen some strength in healthcare, local government, and certain service sectors, but continued weakness and volatility in tech, media, and white-collar corporate roles. Layoffs in professional and corporate jobs are persistent, even as profits in many of these same companies have remained strong, which we've covered here extensively on the Workplace Minute. So from a pure labor market perspective, the story is mixed. If you're a frontline worker, a healthcare worker, in certain skilled trades, the labor market still feels pretty tight. But if you're a knowledge worker, especially in a tech role or a corporate role, the job market feels unstable, competitive, and in many cases downright frightening. And that emotional reality matters just as much as the statistics, because year one has not just been about employment levels, it's also been about power. One of the most significant themes of the first year of this administration has been the noticeable shift in the balance of power between employers and employees, namely a shift back in favor of employers. We've seen an acceleration of return to office mandates. We've seen companies become more comfortable with large-scale layoffs as a simple routine operating tactic. We've seen the cooling off of wage growth. And we've seen a cultural shift where many workers just feel less empowered to push back, to negotiate, to demand flexibility than they did just 2 or 3 years ago. So why these shifts? Well, the broader environment has changed. Regulatory agencies like the EEOC have signaled a different enforcement posture. Federal messaging around labor, equity, and worker protections has softened, or in some cases reversed. And union momentum, which really felt ascendant in 2022 and 2023, that has slowed considerably. And many CEOs and other corporate leaders have interpreted this environment as permission for them to reassert managerial oversight and control. Not quietly, quite openly, in fact. And another major development in year one has been the very visible retreat from corporate DE&I programs. Now, that didn't start this past year, but it accelerated dramatically. Many organizations have scaled back their public commitments, reduced dedicated DE&I roles, rebranded any initiatives they might still have, or moved this work out of the spotlight entirely. And in some cases, companies are doing this out of legal caution. In other cases, it's a response to political pressure or social pressure. And in some cases, it's an opportunity for leaders who were never really fully committed to this work to just quietly let it fade. Now, for workers, the impacts of these changes, they're real. Employees from underrepresented groups are noticing the silence. Caregivers are noticing fewer conversations about workplace flexibility. Older workers, disabled workers, and others who've benefited from more inclusive policies are simply feeling less visible. And many employees who are interpreting this retreat as a signal that their psychological safety is much less of a priority than it was just a few years ago. Employee contributions to their healthcare costs continue to increase, sometimes unsustainably. Now, these aren't just moral issues or fairness issues. There are workplace climate issues. And it connects directly to the major theme of year one from an employee point of view, which is fear, which is anxiety. Workers are more anxious, they're more uncertain, they're more cautious. They're watching these layoffs at many profitable companies. They're watching public debates about equity and fairness. And they're watching and operating in a political climate that feels much more charged and much less predictable. And they're adjusting their behaviors accordingly. They're less likely to speak up, they're less likely to change jobs, they're less likely to push back on management and challenge decisions. 2025 was dubbed a year of employees just trying to keep their heads down and just hold on to their jobs. In short, year one has been a year where many workers feel like the ground has shifted under their feet. Now, it's important to note this. Not every development this year has been negative. Some employers have used this period to get more disciplined about things like performance management. Some have clarified employee expectations. Some have invested in automation and AI in ways that genuinely improve productivity. And some have taken a more clear-eyed and data-driven approach to the people practices that they do have after the excesses and the experimentations of the pandemic era. But the overarching theme from a worker's perspective is clear. Power has tilted back toward employers, and employees are feeling it. So what does this all mean for year two? This is where HR and business leaders have a choice. You can treat the environment as an opportunity to tighten up control, reduce investment in your people, and operate with a purely defensive mindset. Or you could recognize this in a moment where workers feel less secure, less safe, and less heard. Your leadership matters more than ever. In year two, HR leaders need to have a few things squarely on their radar. First, documentation. If you're pursuing fairness, inclusion, pay equity, or structured hiring, you must be more disciplined and data-driven than ever before. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you may have to explain why you are doing something that's right. Second, psychological safety. You cannot assume engagement if employees don't feel safe. Safe in their job, safe in their identity, safe in speaking up. Safety is now the foundation of engagement. Third, transparency around change. Layoffs, AI adoption, restructuring, return to office policies. These are not just operational decisions. They are decisions that impact trust. Now you communicate them will define how your workforce feels about you and their place of employment for years. And lastly, leadership courage. We've said this before, but it's worth repeating. You can't outsource your values somewhere else. You can't rely on regulators or political winds to define what fairness looks like in your organization. That responsibility sits squarely with you. Here at H3HR Advisors, we talk with HR and business leaders all the time who are trying to navigate exactly these challenges. And the ones who will stand out in year two are the ones who recognize that while the external environment may have shifted, their internal responsibility to their people has not changed. Year one changed the climate. Year two will reveal who is willing to lead through it. Thank you so much for listening today. And a big thank you to WorkHuman for supporting the Workplace Minute. If this episode made you think about how your organization is operating in these uncertain times, please share it with a colleague. I'm Steve Boese, and this has been the Workplace Minute from H3 Advisors.